Picture this. It's late 1990, literally the twilight of the Cold War. Our source material for today's explainer kicks off with this incredibly striking image of the world entering a turbulent transitional period. The speaker paints a vivid picture of a world moving away from strong, visionary leaders. We're talking about massive historical shifts, like Margaret Thatcher stepping down and Mikhail Gorbachev feeding from power. And the text describes us entering what it calls a valley of eras. It's a really profound metaphor, honestly. It describes an age of looming dark clouds, a time characterized by this dangerous vacuum in global leadership and, well, just growing geopolitical uncertainty.
So that brings up a really profound question. What exactly is certain hope in a time of looming dark clouds? I mean, if we can't rely on these massive global institutions or political giants to steer the ship anymore, what actually anchors us? The source suggests that in an era where the United Nations might struggle to be effective, and nations are swaying like tiny boats in a massive storm, we literally have to look somewhere else for a reliable compass. We have to find a totally different kind of hope.
And that's exactly what we're diving into with today's explainer. We're breaking down a fascinating 1990 address called The Surging River of Love, which was delivered at the Okinawa Convention Center. What's absolutely captivating about this source text is how it takes macro-level global history and connects it directly to highly personal micro-level spiritual practices. It takes all those massive anxieties about a shifting global order and distills them down into very specific individual actions focused on spiritual health and ancestor memorialization. Okay, here's our game plan for today. We'll be hitting 5 main points. First, hope amidst dark clouds. Second, legacy of the war. Third, saving ancestors through truth. Fourth, repelling evil spirits. And finally, the great river of love. Let's get into it.
Starting off with Section 1, Hope Amidst Dark Clouds, Navigating the Valley of Eras. The text draws this really brilliant contrast right away. While these major political figures were fading out and the whole world was bracing for instability, there was this completely different kind of movement quietly but rapidly gaining momentum. According to the source, just 4 years prior, in 1986, the spiritual movement started with just 90 people, hanging out in a small tatamiri room in Nippori. Fast forward to early 1990, it had surged to 20,000 attendees in Tokyo. And by November, 4,000 people had gathered in Okinawa for this exact address. The argument here is that while top-down political power is incredibly fragile, grassroots spiritual awakening creates this rapidly expanding stream of hope. Moving right along to Section 2, Legacy of the War, the Spiritual Aftermath of Okinawa. Now, the text transitions away from global politics to focus on the specific, tragic history of Okinawa itself, hitting us with a really sobering number, over 200,000 lives lost in the Battle of Okinawa. The source makes the point that war is fundamentally just an extension of politics. And politics? Well, that ultimately comes from the collective choices of a nation's people. This astronomical loss of life is a tragic reminder of how our collective choices quite literally impact individual human lives. And the text leaves us with this haunting thought that many of these individuals died without ever really understanding why they had to die, what they were protecting, or what was going to happen to them next. To address this tragedy, the speaker introduces a really unique spiritual framework. They estimate that even 45 years after the battle, while maybe 2/3 of those lost souls have found their way back to their proper spiritual realm, a pretty significant chunk, about 1/3, are actually still wandering. The source claims these spirits are trapped. They're stuck in the tragic, confused state of their final moments, completely unable to comprehend their own deaths or move on. So you have tens of thousands of spirits supposedly stuck in this state of unresolved suffering. Which brings us to Section 3, Saving Ancestors Through Truth, Securing Your Spiritual Oxygen Mask. So you're probably wondering, how on earth should the living respond to this kind of lingering, unseen tragedy? Well, the text says that to truly help these wandering spirits, your standard traditional rituals just aren't going to cut it. You have to establish what's called en. It's a profound Japanese concept that means a spiritual connection or a tie. Basically, the source argues that spiritual salvation only works through this law of en. Think about it. If a spirit is totally lost in the dark, they can't exactly study or learn on their own. They need a living person to act as a conduit. So as the living person learns and studies spiritual truths, that understanding flows directly through that connection, the en, to the deceased, slowly illuminating the reality and helping them finally find peace. But, and this is a huge but, the text draws a very sharp line between two ways of living. On one side, you have a heavenly mindset. This is all about self-responsibility, showing gratitude, and always looking inward to improve yourself. On the flip side, you have a hellish mindset. This is when you're constantly looking outward for a scapegoat, blaming your ancestors, blaming the political climate, or blaming the economy for your own personal unhappiness. The source explicitly warns that trying to appease your ancestors just because you think they're causing your bad luck, that is completely backward. Doing that actually creates a hellish mental state that completely blocks any real healing or salvation for either of you.
The source illustrates this perfectly with a metaphor that I like to call the oxygen mask principle. You know the drill when you're on an airplane, right? You have to secure your own mask before helping the person next to you. The text puts it this way: a drowning person cannot save another drowning person. You have to become a swimming expert first. In the spiritual context, it literally means you cannot save your ancestors or even conduct a proper memorial service unless you've already secured your own spiritual well-being. You have to awaken to the truth yourself before you can even think about passing that light onto those who have passed away.
All right, section 4, repelling evil spirits, practical steps for spiritual protection.
Now, as you dive deeper into these spiritual realms, the text notes you might run into some negative resistance, and the source literally gives us a step-by-step Japanese exorcism method to deal with it. It explains that spiritual self-defense is fundamentally about aligning your own wavelength with higher, positive frequencies. But if you're facing intense negative interference, they offer a very physical ritual. Step 1, create a kekai, which is a circular barrier using physical copies of spiritual truth books. The source claims these books physically emit a golden spiritual light. Step 2, you sit right in the center of this protective circle and play audio lectures to fill the space with positive energy. And step 3, you recite specific, powerful texts like the Shojin Hogo or other strong prayers. According to the source, this combo of physical barriers and high-frequency recitations makes it completely impossible for negative or evil spirits to stick around. It's a really fascinating way to make the abstract feel incredibly tangible.
And our final part today, section 5, the Great River of Love, gathering the light of happiness.
So having covered how to protect yourself and help your ancestors, the text zooms back out to look at how this personal spiritual hygiene impacts the wider world. It outlines this beautifully structured 3-part progression of happiness. First up is sekufuku. This is simply the act of being deeply humble and appreciative of the happiness you already have, rather than being arrogant about it. Second is bumfuku. This is the realization that happiness isn't something you just hoard for yourself. You have to actively share it with your neighbors, your friends, and your community. And third is shokufuku, which means planting the seeds of happiness for the future, like educating kids or working to shape a better society. The speaker actually compares happiness to food. If you just hoard it all for yourself, it spiritually spoils and dies. It absolutely must be appreciated, shared, and invested forward to stay alive.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer, and the source leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. Just like a massive, surging river starts with single drops of water, global peace and a new era of hope have to start with individual points of light. So the question is, will you take personal responsibility? Will you cultivate your own heavenly mindset, help the people who came before you, and let your individual drop of happiness flow into a much greater collective harmony? Because the text suggests that this right here, and not the decrees of fleeting politicians, is the true surging river of love that can actually heal a turbulent world. Thanks so much for exploring this fascinating material with me today.